Joining me is our panel, Darren Barnett, a founding partner at Watson Consultants, and also Liberal Party Vice President Fiona Scott. Fiona, what do you make of the budget update yesterday? Much of what the Treasurer says the increased spending amounts to is indexation of pensions, Medicare spending, inevitable or unavoidable expenditure. Is it a risk for the coalition to go so hard at him and saying, look, you've baked in all this spending, you're increasing debt, you're pushing up interest rates? Because then they'll say to the Liberal Party and the coalition, where are the further cuts coming from?
I don't think so. I think because at the end of the day, housing prices are sticky, interest rates are staying put. The Reserve Bank has been very clear about that, whilst America is, changing their settings and have had decreases in those interest rates. At the end of the day, we're looking down the barrel of $1 billion of debt baked in.
$1 trillion.
Trillion, correct. $1 trillion of debt. 10 years of baked-in deficits. And look, we can blame everybody in COVID and everything for that, so let's not get partisan there. But, the challenges here is that we've got to fix productivity. We've got to not have more bureaucrats here in Canberra, where you and I both live. It's about getting the economy cranking for people in the suburbs where they live. And when the jobs aren't there and the economy's not going well, private sector investment isn't there in the outer metropolitan suburbs like Lindsay, like Werriwa, like the outskirts of Brisbane. These seats will determine who's going to probably be in the position to negotiate their way into government. And, whilst the government isn't actually meeting the needs and the hurt in the hip pockets of Australians right around the country, particularly in those marginal seats, then I don't see there being relief. I don't see that the messaging from Jim Chalmers is where it needs to be. And the issue around housing and cost of living and interest rates, I'm sure that's not where Jim Chalmers and Anthony Albanese wanted to be going into Christmas either.
Darren, it's a diabolical challenge for the government to try and navigate when you've got uncertainty around interest rates and what the RBA does, and at the same time the government being accused of spending too much, but they would argue they needed to prop up the economy, otherwise we'd be in recession, Darren.
Well, that's true, Kieran, that they have a job to do. It's a balancing act and trying to, they say, get the balance right in the national interest. And that's what they are endeavouring to do. In the end, Australians will make their mind up on polling day whether they think they've done an adequate job or not. But the task ahead of us, irrespective of who's in power, is a tough one. We've got to, probably rein in spending. We've got deficits out into the future. There's also an election coming, so they're not going to be the first or last government to save a little bit to spend on election promises. So it's going to be an interesting period over summer. I guess we're going to have to wait and see what happens with Christmas spending and therefore how that impacts the first RBA meeting of the year and whether there's pressure for rates to potentially come down. That's going to be, as we've all said, for the last 6 months, that's going to be the big ticket item that Labor's looking for as it heads towards re-election. Obviously, if that doesn't happen, it's going to be a tougher environment to convince everybody that things are going to get better.
Yeah, that does look like, as you put it, the big ticket item. When we look at as we head into Christmas and we all observe politics very closely, as do many of our viewers, you look at international developments, even at the state level, incumbents have struggled because people have been struggling around the kitchen table to make their budgets work. The parallel to that, though, is the history in this country is when first-term governments, not just first-term, but incumbent governments generally have been in a tough spot. Often you'll see an opposition look like they're, well-placed to win, like we saw recently with the Shorten opposition, only for them to fall over when it comes to the scrutiny of an election campaign. So, Fiona, there's a few different competing bits of analysis there, I guess. Do we see the flow of the poor result for the incumbent, or do we see inflated expectations for an opposition that ultimately don't eventuate come election day?
Yeah, Kieran, political history will tell you that it's very challenging for first-term, oppositions, so to speak, to win government back in one term. It's quite an unprecedented move. But, our country also has a lot of challenges right now. And I think Anthony Albanese in this term has probably, squandered a lot of political capital on wrong things and things that didn't resonate with you know, the people living in Australia at the moment, people who are struggling with their cost of living. And, you know, the challenges around the high immigration rate that we have seen. You know, I've come from Western Sydney and, you know, where is the equal housing matching the population coming into our country? Where is the opportunity that we look at our kids and say, you know, it's going to be easier for you to get ahead than it was for me? And our parents saying that to us, and as the generations go down, I mean, in some ways, it's almost like our generation is handing a legacy to the next generation of things not being as good as it was for us or the generations before. And these things impact people right around the country. And Anthony Albanese, to those groups of people, sounds like he has a tin ear, that he's talking to the wrong things. He's focused on things that aren't necessarily resonating. The stickiness of the RBA numbers, I mean, when that's compounded with the increase in government spending, the $1 trillion in debt that we're looking at, the 37,000 public servants potentially coming into Canberra, people in Western Sydney don't want to hear that. That's not helping them when they go to Woolies this afternoon and they can't get all the groceries they want for a great Christmas day, you know.
Yeah.
And these things will impact Anthony Albanese. Is this enough to provide the right numbers of seats in the chambers to change government? Is it enough to win right across the country, where we already know that, you know, the way Western Australians vote won't be the same as the Queenslanders, and North Queensland is different to South Queensland. It's a very complex puzzle that has to get put together. And will that be enough to get across the line? I think it's going to be a challenge for whoever it is to get the right numbers of seats to form that majority.
The Labor National Secretary, Paul Erickson, he's been very clear to the Labor caucus they need to be vigilant and stay on those key issues of cost of living and the main game, as we call it, Darren, because that's what it is. That's where the focus needs to be. At times, as Fiona has said, the government hasn't been as sharp on that as they need to be.
That's probably true, Kieran. But equally, I think you'll find Peter Dutton talking about the Aboriginal flag, I think, was a misstep last week. It should be cost of living for government and opposition. And every announcement, every event that pollies go to, every conversation that they have, it's all about trying to find a way to ease the pressure for everyday Australians, for their lives to become a little bit simpler and a little bit easier. And, you know, as you know, that federal government is all about selling hope for the future, and people have to believe things are going to get better in order for the government to get re-elected. Therefore, all of the messaging needs to be framed in that way, and both parties should be trying to convince voters that their plan is the better plan.
Yes, and that vision for the future, it's pretty important, isn't it, Darren? Fiona, great to see you both. I hope you both have a restful summer and a new year. I'll see you next year.